On a bright winter morning, Declan Ward heard a faint scratching beneath the tarp in his truck. An exhausted German shepherd was hiding there, watching every exit as if safety could vanish at any moment. The dog's worn collar carried only a faded number, but that number led to Walter Keene, a man who had lost control of his home. Walter had signed the papers himself, believing it was the only way to keep his independence and the dog he loved. Now Declan had to decide whether helping meant fighting for Walter or learning to stop choosing for him. What followed was not only a battle over land, but a quiet lesson about dignity, loyalty, and the courage to stay. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe as we work toward 1,000 subscribers and more heartfelt stories. Snow had fallen through the night without wind, covering Brightwater Pass in a clean, level silence. By 8 in the morning, sunlight had begun to spread across the valley, pale and cold, turning the frozen surface of Silver Pine Lake into a sheet of dull glass. The roofs along Main Street wore soft white caps. Smoke rose straight from chimneys before dissolving into the blue. Even the abandoned tourist cabins near the eastern ridge looked briefly cared for. Declan Ward trusted mornings like this less than storms. A storm announced what it intended to do. A bright winter morning hid ice under powder and made people believe the roads were kinder than they were. His black pickup rolled into the gravel lot behind Branson Feed and Supply, tires pressing dark tracks through the fresh snow. The truck was 12 years old, square-bodied, dented above the rear wheel, and maintained with the obsessive care Declan refused to apply to most other parts of his life. He parked near the loading door and cut the engine. For a moment, he remained behind the wheel, watching sunlight gather on the hood. His left knee had stiffened during the drive from the edge of town. He pressed 2 fingers against the joint, waited for the ache to settle, then reached for the old brass-colored disc in the cup holder. The disc had been machined from the piston of the first truck he repaired after leaving the Navy. One side carried an imperfect circle, cut by hand and never corrected. Declan turned it once between his thumb and forefinger before slipping it into the pocket of his green camouflage shirt. At 57, he no longer wore anything that identified his former service. No patches, no unit insignia, no name stitched over the chest. The shirt was simply useful. Heavy fabric, 2 deep pockets, sleeves he could roll above his forearms when working. The colors had faded into olive, brown, and moss. Beneath it, a charcoal t-shirt fitted close against a broad chest, built less by training now than by engines, tires, and machinery that rarely respected a man's back. His dark chestnut hair, silvered heavily at the temples, had flattened beneath a charcoal knit cap. Salt and pepper stubble covered his square, slightly long face, the gray strongest beneath his lower lip and across the middle of his chin. His pale gray-blue eyes gave most people the mistaken impression that he was suspicious of them. Usually, he was only tired. Declan stepped out, closed the door, and crossed toward the loading bay. A young employee had already stacked 2 filters, a case of oil, and 3 bags of feed beside the door. Declan signed the invoice, declined coffee, and loaded everything himself. He placed the filters in the toolbox, wedged the oil against the cab wall, then dragged a heavy green tarp over the load. The feed bags went last, their paper surfaces carrying the dry, earthy smell of grain and molasses. He had nearly secured the tailgate when someone inside the store called his name. "Ward, you still working on the Bellamy generator?" Declan looked over one shoulder. "Until it stops inventing new problems." The man laughed. Declan did not wait for the rest of the conversation. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and reached for the gear shift. Then something scraped behind him. Not the clean slide of a filter box, not the heavy shift of a feed bag. A faint, uneven dragging sound moved across the truck bed, followed by a single hollow tap against metal. Declan kept his hand on the gear shift. The sound did not repeat. He watched the rear window. The dark tarp filled most of the view. Snow glittered along the edge of the tailgate. Nothing moved. He turned off the engine. Outside, the lot had begun to wake. A delivery van idled near the front entrance. Two men in insulated coveralls argued mildly over a pallet of salt. Somewhere beyond the store, a snowblower coughed to life. Declan stepped out and walked around the truck without hurry. He did not know yet what was under the tarp. A raccoon would have made more noise. A loose tool would not have breathed. He heard that now. Thin. Shallow. Fast. Declan stopped beside the rear wheel. A line of disturbed snow led from the fence behind the store to the truck. The tracks were partly ruined by tire marks, but the shape was clear enough. Large paws, unevenly placed, one front print lighter than the others. He lowered the tailgate slowly. The tarp shifted. Declan did not reach for it. He placed both hands where they could be seen, waited, then drew one corner back by inches. A German shepherd lay beneath it. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The dog was old enough for silver to have begun spreading across its black muzzle. Its coat was yellow-black, though the yellow had darkened with wet snow and dirt into the color of burned honey. A narrow black saddle ran along its back. One ear stood upright. The outer edge of the other carried a small V-shaped notch. It was a male, large-framed but too thin, his flanks drawn inward beneath the damp fur. A worn strip of reddish-brown leather circled his neck. Whatever tag had once hung there was gone. His left front paw rested lightly on the metal bed, as though placing full weight on it required a decision. There was no serious wound Declan could see, only raw pads, stiffness, and the trembling exhaustion of an animal that had moved beyond hunger into calculation. The shepherd pressed himself deeper into the corner near the wheel well. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. His amber-brown eyes moved from Declan's hands to his face, then past him toward the open lot. Declan understood the look. Not trust. Not surrender. Assessment. "How did you get in there?" he asked quietly. The dog's torn ear shifted, but nothing else changed. Declan crouched, favoring his left knee. He stayed outside the truck bed and angled his body slightly away. Direct attention could feel like pressure. Pressure made frightened things choose before they were ready. A voice carried across the parking lot. "Anybody see a shepherd come through here?" The dog changed before Declan turned. His body lowered until his chest nearly touched the truck bed. His breathing stopped for one beat. Then he forced himself up despite the injured paw and rotated toward the open tailgate. Not away from Declan, between Declan and the voice. That movement held no strength to spare, yet the dog made it anyway. Declan looked across the lot. A tall, narrow man in a brown work jacket was moving between parked vehicles. A burnt orange knit cap covered most of his thinning blonde-brown hair. A handheld radio was clipped near his shoulder, and in his right hand, he carried a red animal control catch lead, a long pole with a looped cable at the end. Harlan Pike. Declan knew him by sight. Harlan handled cleanouts, towing, and property removals for whichever contractor paid fastest. He was not known for cruelty exactly. He was known for treating urgency as permission. Harlan stopped beside the loading bay and questioned one of the employees. "Big yellow and black shepherd," he said. "Old dog. Came off a repossessed property near Silver Pine. It's been loose since last night." The employee shrugged. "Dangerous?" someone asked. "Could be. Been acting territorial." The shepherd's weight shifted forward, though his legs shook beneath him. Declan watched the dog's eyes lock onto the red loop. There were times when fear scattered an animal, made it frantic and noisy. This was not that kind. This fear had been held too long. It had learned to remain still until stillness failed. Harlan turned toward the line of trucks. Declan looked back at the shepherd. The dog was barely standing, but he had placed himself in the only available opening as if Declan were the one who needed protection. Something tightened beneath Declan's ribs. Years ago, he had known men who continued guarding doors long after there was no strength left in them. Men who would rather collapse facing danger than survive with their backs turned. He had once admired that. Later, he had learned what it cost. Declan reached slowly for the tarp. The shepherd's eyes followed his hand. "I'm closing this," Declan said. "Not on you." He lowered the tarp only enough to hide the dog from view, leaving air open along both sides. Then he raised the tailgate and secured it without slamming. Harlan was 3 vehicles away when Declan returned to the cab. Their eyes met briefly. "Ward," Harlan called. "You seen a dog?" Declan opened the driver's door. "I've seen several." Harlan frowned. "German Shepherd. Came off Vale property." "Then you should have paperwork." "I've got a work order." "That wasn't what I said." Harlan's mouth tightened. He glanced toward the truck bed, but the tarp lay still. Declan climbed in before the conversation could grow teeth. He started the engine and pulled away at ordinary speed. In the side mirror, Harlan stood in the snow and watched him go. A moment later, Harlan removed one glove, took out his phone, and aimed it toward the rear of the pickup. The plate number would be easy enough to record. Declan drove 2 blocks before calling Lena Carver. She answered on the 4th ring. "If this is about the Bellamy generator, I treat animals, not haunted machinery. I found a dog." A pause. "What condition?" "Older shepherd. Exhausted. Favoring a front paw. Dehydrated probably. No obvious major injury." "Where?" "In my truck." "That part concerns me less than it should. Bring him through the side entrance. Call animal control on the way." "You call them?" "No, you found him." "You make the report." Declan looked at the road ahead. Sunlight flashed across packed snow between the buildings. "Harlan Pike says the dog came off a repossessed property." "Then everyone will enjoy showing me valid documents. Call Amos." The line disconnected. Declan drove with the heater low, so the sudden warmth would not overwhelm the animal behind him. At every stop, he listened for movement from the truck bed. Once, he heard a dull shift beneath the tarp. Nothing more. Amos Bell answered with the patience of a man already disappointed by the day. Declan gave his name, location, the time he found the dog, and Harlan's claim. "You removed the animal from the property?" Amos asked. "No. He climbed into my truck at Branson's." "You have witnesses?" "Store employees. Cameras, probably." "Do not decide he belongs to you." "I haven't." "Do not transfer him to anyone except a veterinarian or an authorized officer." "I'm driving to Lena." Amos sighed. "I'll meet you there." Lena's clinic sat near the southern edge of town, a low cedar building with blue trim and a narrow side door kept clear of snow. She was waiting outside when Declan arrived. At 50, Lena had the steady, practical build of someone accustomed to lifting frightened animals without making the work look dramatic. Her black hair, streaked with silver, was braided low beneath a wool cap. Dark teal scrubs showed beneath a petrol blue quilted coat. Her amber-brown eyes went first to Declan, then to the truck. "You didn't put him in the cab?" "He was already in the bed. Moving him seemed worse." "Reasonable. Annoying, but reasonable." They opened the tailgate together. The shepherd was lying down again, but his eyes remained open. Lena lowered herself until she was level with his shoulder, rather than leaning over him. "Hello, old man," she said. "Nobody here needs anything from you yet." Declan noticed the word yet. Lena moved slowly, offering the back of one hand, then waiting. The shepherd sniffed once but did not lean closer. With a blanket used as a sling, they transferred him inside without struggle. He became rigid when lifted, but made no attempt to bite. Amos arrived during the examination. He was 64, compact and solid, with a white-gray mustache and pale eyes narrowed from years of wind. His county uniform was blue-gray, practical rather than imposing. A battered notebook with taped corners appeared in his hand before he finished removing his gloves. He listened to Declan's account, questioned Lena, then photographed the old collar and the dog's general condition. "The animal remains unclaimed pending identification," Amos said. "Dr. Carver records medical status. You may provide temporary care if she approves the location." Declan looked at him. "You inspected my property last year." "I inspect again when circumstances change." "Of course you do." Amos's mustache shifted slightly. It might have been the beginning of a smile. Lena found dehydration, underfeeding, strained muscles, cracked pads, and irritation where the collar had rubbed. Nothing life-threatening, provided the shepherd ate, drank, and rested. "He needs quiet more than sympathy," she said. "Small meals, warm water, no crowding, no one reaching over his head." "I know." Lena looked at him. Declan amended. "I can follow instructions." "That remains under review." By late afternoon, Amos had inspected the heated room behind Declan's workshop and approved the temporary arrangement. Declan drove home with the shepherd inside the cab this time, lying on folded blankets in the passenger footwell. The dog watched him for most of the trip. Declan did not fill the silence. His home stood at the edge of town, where the plowed road narrowed toward the pines. The front half was a modest cedar house. The rear opened into Shawline Repair, a high-roofed workshop that smelled of oil, iron, sawdust, and the old wood stove near the office wall. Declan placed a thick blanket close to the stove, set down warm water, and prepared a small portion of softened food. The shepherd walked past all of it. Slowly, favoring the left paw, he moved into the hallway between the house and workshop. From there he could see the front door, the wide workshop entrance, and the bottom of the stairs. He lowered himself against the wall. Declan studied the arrangement. "Bad location," he said. The dog watched him. "Draft from the shop, hard floor, too much traffic." No response. Declan carried the blanket into the hallway and placed it nearby without trying to move him. Then he set the bowls within reach and backed away. The shepherd did not drink. Declan waited. After several minutes, he sat on the lowest stair, turned his body sideways, and took the brass piston disc from his pocket. He rolled it slowly across his knuckles, looking toward the workshop rather than at the dog. The room settled around them. A pipe clicked in the wall. Wind brushed loose snow against the windows. Somewhere in the shop, cooling metal gave a soft tick. At last, the shepherd lowered his head to the bowl. He drank carefully, pausing after every few swallows to check Declan's position. Declan remained still. When the dog finished, he did not lie fully down. He kept his head raised, eyes moving from one doorway to the next, guarding all three. Declan turned the brass disc once in his hand. The animal was warm now. Fed. Safe for the night at least. Yet his body had not accepted any of it. Declan understood then that the shepherd was not only afraid of pain, hunger, or cold. He was afraid that safety itself might be temporary, that any open hand could close around the old collar, that any warm room might belong to someone who would return him to the place he had used the last of his strength to escape. Declan looked toward the dark windows of the workshop, then back at the dog without meeting his eyes directly. "No one's taking you tonight," he said. The shepherd did not relax, but he stopped looking at the front door long enough to look at Declan. For now, that was enough. By the third morning, the dog had learned the sound of Declan's boots, not accepted them, not welcomed them, learned them. The heavy tread across the workshop floor meant food would arrive without a hand reaching over his head. The slower step in the hallway meant Declan was carrying water. The scrape, followed by a muttered curse, meant the old man had forgotten his left knee and tried to turn too quickly. The workshop adjusted around the shepherd as if a new machine had been installed, one with no manual, uncertain tolerances, and a habit of watching every doorway. Declan moved the pneumatic impact wrench to the rear bay because its sudden rattle made the dog's shoulders lock. He stopped dropping sockets into the metal tray. He kept the side entrance closed against drafts and began warming water before he made coffee, a change he found more disturbing than he intended to admit. A second bowl appeared beside the wood stove, then a folded towel, then an old rubber-backed mat in the hallway because the concrete floor was cold and the shepherd still refused the better blanket near the heat. Declan told himself none of it meant anything. He was following Lena's instructions. Lena Carver arrived each morning with snow on her boots and the same dark red medical bag. She never called the dog brave. She did not praise him for tolerating pain or tell him he was safe, as if words alone could alter memory. She examined the strained paw, checked his gums, listened to his heart, and watched how long it took him to recover after each touch. "He's eating better," she said on the fourth day. "He leaves half. He used to leave more." "That your professional optimism? That is arithmetic." She sat on the floor instead of using a stool. Her black and silver braid rested over one shoulder, and the blue cloth wrapped around part of her stethoscope made a soft line against her dark teal scrubs. The shepherd allowed her to examine his paw without pulling away. His body remained rigid, but his breathing no longer stopped entirely. Progress, Lena called it. Declan thought progress should look less like endurance. Amos Bell came every other day, though he had no medical reason to do so. He carried his taped blue notebook and inspected bowls, doors, sleeping areas, and Declan's temporary care paperwork, with the grave suspicion of a man auditing a prison. "You always count blankets?" Declan asked. "I count what people forget." "There are 3. "I see that." "Then why write it down?" Amos glanced at him over the top of the notebook. "Because you might remove one after I leave." Declan stared at him. The edge of Amos's white-gray mustache lifted. The shepherd watched both men from the hallway. His ears moved with their voices, but his body no longer flattened when Amos entered. That was more trust than Declan had expected from him. At night, the dog began moving closer. Not close enough to touch. Never that. On the first night, he slept where the hallway met the shop. On the second, he moved halfway toward the stairs. By the fourth, Declan woke at 2 a.m. and found him lying several feet from the bedroom door, positioned so that he could still see the front entry through the railing. Declan stood in the doorway, wearing an olive Henley and canvas work pants, one hand resting against the frame. The dog lifted his head. "Terrible place to sleep," Declan said. The shepherd lowered his chin again. Declan left him there. The name came the following afternoon. Snow drifted past the workshop windows in small, dry grains. Declan sat at the old desk near the office, sorting invoices while the shepherd occupied the hallway intersection. From there, the dog could see the main bay, the front entrance, and the stairs. Every time Declan moved a box, the dog adjusted his head to keep all 3 routes in view. "You're like a rook," Declan said. The dog's right ear lifted. Declan paused with a receipt in his hand. The words suited him, not because the dog resembled a chess piece, but because he seemed built around straight lines and guarded paths. He chose corners that allowed him to protect more than one direction. He did not waste movement. He held position until the position no longer mattered. "Rook," Declan repeated. The notched left ear angled slightly. That was all. No sudden wagging tail. No miraculous recognition. No proof the name meant anything beyond the tone of Declan's voice. Still, Declan wrote it in pencil on the feeding chart Lena had taped above the sink. Temporary name. Rook. He did not examine why the word temporary bothered him. Later that day, Lena removed the old collar. The leather had stiffened with age and damp. Beneath it, the fur was thinned in places, but the irritation had begun to heal. Lena turned the collar over beneath the examination lamp. There was a tag here. Declan leaned against the counter. Gone. Not entirely. Near the buckle, almost hidden beneath a fold in the leather, was a narrow metal plate. Most of the surface had been scratched pale. No name remained, only a partial county seal and 6 uneven digits. Lena cleaned the plate with saline and read them aloud. Amos, who had arrived 10 minutes earlier to count blankets or invent some other official purpose, took off his glasses and bent closer. That prefix isn't Brightwater, he said. You know every dog license number in Montana? Declan asked. No, only the badly designed systems I've complained about for 30 years. Amos took a photograph and opened a county database on his phone. The signal in the workshop was poor. The page loaded once, froze, and returned an error. Technology, Amos muttered. The promise that paperwork can disappoint you faster. The first search revealed almost nothing. The license had expired 22 months earlier. The contact address had been removed during a software transfer, and the registered clinic no longer appeared active. The only useful line was a district code tied to the Silver Pine region on the far side of the county. Lena looked at Rook, who was lying on the rubber mat with his good front paw stretched forward. That's not much. It's more than yesterday, Amos said. Declan watched the old collar on the counter. 6 digits. A faded seal. A district code. The remains of a life reduced to the part bureaucracy had failed to erase. For reasons he could not explain, that angered him more than the marks around Rook's neck. The search took 4 days. Amos called the county licensing office. Lena contacted 2 veterinary practices near Silver Pine. Declan drove to the records annex after Amos discovered the original clinic had closed following the owner's retirement. The annex occupied the basement of an old municipal building where the radiators clanged and the fluorescent lights made everyone look accused. Boxes of paper records stood in rows behind a gray counter. The clerk on duty, a woman with silver hair and a cardigan the color of dried sage, refused to let Declan search anything himself. Privacy regulations, she said. I'm looking for a dog. Dogs have owners. Owners have privacy. The owner may be looking for him. Then the authorized officer can make the request. Declan turned toward Amos. Amos did not look sorry. 3 forms and 40 minutes later, they received access to the archived license ledger. The number led to a veterinary file. The veterinary file led to a name. Walter Keene, owner of a small apple orchard and a cedar house near Silver Pine Lake. Declan read the address twice. On the drive back, Amos sat in the passenger seat with the file copy on his lap. Rook had not come. Lena had insisted the trip was unnecessary for him. You planning to go out there? Amos asked. Yes. You are temporary caregiver, not investigator. I'm driving to an address. That sentence has caused me trouble before. Declan looked at the road. You want to come? No? Then don't. Amos sighed. Call me if anyone claims ownership. Do not hand over the dog without verification. I know. You say that often. People repeat themselves around me. The Keene property lay beyond a curve where the lake road narrowed between stands of white pine. Sunlight spread across the frozen water, bright enough to hurt the eyes. The orchard appeared first, rows of old trees rising black from the snow, their branches twisted and bare. Orange markings had been painted on several trunks. Some carried survey ribbons. A temporary chain-link fence enclosed the house and outbuildings. Near the gate stood a large rendering of glass-fronted cottages beneath the words, Silver Pine Renewal Village, a safer future for mountain living. The cedar house beyond the sign looked neither abandoned nor unsafe. Snow covered the porch steps. Curtains still hung in the front windows. A wooden bench sat beneath the eaves, one armrest repaired with a newer piece of maple. Declan parked outside the fence. Harlan Pike emerged from the equipment shed before Declan reached the gate. He wore the same brown work jacket and orange knit cap. A radio rested at his shoulder, and a ring of keys swung from one hand. "You following me now?" Harlan asked. "Walter Keene live here." "Used to." "Where is he?" "No idea." "You were hired to clear his property and never asked where he went." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Property was transferred. Vale's people handle the owner. I handle what gets left behind." "What about the dog?" "That thing kept coming back, dug under the fence twice, snapped at one of the loaders." "Bit him?" I said snapped. "That means no." Harlan stepped closer to the gate. "I had orders to take it to county holding. It slipped the restraint while I was loading it." "You have an order from animal control?" "A work order." "Show me." Harlan produced a folded document from his coat. It authorized removal of remaining personal property, debris, and unsecured animals from the site. It did not establish ownership of Rook. It did not identify a shelter or animal control officer. The only report stating the dog had been abandoned was signed by Harlan himself. Declan handed the paper back. "This doesn't give you custody. It gives me a job." "Those aren't the same thing." For a moment, Harlan looked as though he might argue louder. Then he glanced toward the road, perhaps remembering the cameras at Branson Feed, Amos's involvement, or the plate number already attached to Declan's name. "Keene signed the place over," Harlan said, packed up and left. "Dog stayed. That's abandonment where I come from. Maybe where you come from needs better definitions." Declan returned to the truck before anger could turn the conversation useless. He did not find Walter at the property. He found him through a woman selling coffee near the old Silver Pine bus stop. Her name was Ruthie Mallon, though everyone in the district seemed to call her Miss Ruthie, despite her being well past 70. She operated a narrow kiosk attached to a former ticket booth, wearing a plum-colored coat and fingerless wool gloves, while steam clouded the small window. Declan showed her a photograph Lena had taken of Rook. Miss Ruthie adjusted her glasses. "That's Walter's dog." "You're sure?" "I sold that animal more dry biscuits than Walter ever paid for." She remembered Walter riding the county senior shuttle into Brightwater twice a month for medical appointments. Rook always traveled with him, lying beneath the bench while Walter waited. "They stopped coming before Christmas," she said. "Then one of the shuttle drivers told me Walter had been moved." "Where?" "Not moved like a nursing home. Temporary housing. Church arranged it." She wrote a number on the back of a coffee sleeve. The trail led back toward Brightwater Pass to an old roadside motel called Pineway Lodge. The church had leased 8 rooms for adults displaced during winter. The vacancy sign no longer worked, but each door had been repainted blue, and smoke rose from a new metal chimney near the laundry room. Reverend June Mercer met Declan in the small office. She was 66, broad-faced and steady, with short silver curls and a burgundy cardigan beneath a navy wool coat. A brass lamp pin rested near her collar. The large ring of keys at her waist announced each step before she did. When Declan explained why he had come, June studied him for several seconds. "Walter is here," she said. "He does not discuss the house." "I'm not asking him to." "You are arriving with the dog. That is a discussion whether you speak or not." Declan looked toward the parking lot, where Rook waited in the cab on Lena's approved blanket. June's expression softened, but not enough to become permission. "He believes he failed that dog," she said. "Be careful which part of him you hand back." Walter Keene occupied room 7. Declan knocked once. The door opened several inches. Walter was taller than Declan expected, though age and back pain had drawn his shoulders inward. Thick white hair had been pushed away from his forehead by hand. His face was long and sharply tired, with pale green-brown eyes and the roughened skin of someone who had spent decades outdoors. A red carpenter's pencil rested behind one ear. He looked at Declan first. Then he saw Rook. The old man stopped breathing. Rook stood beside Declan on the cleared walkway. His body went still, but not with fear. his ears angled forward. For the first time since Declan had found him, the dog's attention left every doorway and fixed entirely on one person. Walter's hand tightened on the edge of the door. "Rook," he whispered. The name settled over the dog like something returned. Rook took one careful step, then another. Walter opened the door wider but did not bend down. Relief crossed his face so quickly it almost became joy. Then shame rose behind it and closed everything again. "You found him," Walter said. "He found my truck." Walter looked at the dog's fuller coat, the clean paw wrap, the temporary tag on the collar Lena had provided. "You've been feeding him?" "Yes. He looks better. He's getting there." Walter swallowed. "Then keep him." Declan said nothing. "I can't afford him," Walter continued. "I don't have a yard. I don't know where I'll be next month. He needs someone who can buy proper food and take him to a doctor." "He already has an owner." Walter's eyes hardened, not with anger, but defense. "Not anymore." Rook reached him. He did not leap or whine. He touched his nose to Walter's large, weathered hands, breathing in the familiar scent. Walter's fingers trembled, but remained open. Rook lowered himself across the threshold. His head came to rest on his front paws. Walter looked down at him. "Come on," Declan said gently. "We should let him rest." Rook did not move. Declan picked up the lead. Rook stayed where he was, body relaxed for the first time, blocking neither exit nor danger. Only the distance between himself and Walter. Declan looked at the old man in the doorway. Walter's face folded. Not dramatically. Not enough for tears. Only enough to reveal what the last months had taken from him. Rook closed his eyes. And when Declan gave the lead the lightest pull, the dog remained exactly where he had chosen to be. For 3 days, Rook stayed at Pineway Lodge with Walter. The arrangement was temporary, specific, and written down in Amos Bell's careful block letters. Declan remained responsible for food, medication, transportation, and every veterinary appointment. Reverend June Mercer agreed to supervise the motel room, provided no one treated the place like an informal kennel. Walter accepted the terms without gratitude. That, Declan understood. Gratitude could become another debt if a man had already lost too much. Each morning, Declan drove over with measured portions of food, and Lena's instructions folded inside his coat pocket. Rook met him at the blue-painted door of room 7, not with excitement, but with recognition. The shepherd would stand, inspect Declan's hands, then glance back toward Walter before stepping aside. Walter had placed an old wool blanket near the radiator. Rook ignored it and slept beside the narrow bed, where he could keep one eye on the door and one on the old man. He always did that, Walter said the second morning. Declan set the food bowl down. "Watch the door?" "Watch me." Walter sat at a small table repairing the loose hinge on a wooden keepsake box. He wore a gray cardigan over a faded flannel shirt, with a red carpenter's pencil tucked behind his right ear. His large hands moved slowly but precisely. The shortened index finger on his left hand rested against the brass hinge while he tightened the final screw. "Medical alert?" Declan asked. "Not officially." Walter closed the box. "If I got dizzy in the orchard, he'd lean against my leg before I knew it was happening. Sometimes he knew from the way I stood. Sometimes from the way I breathed." Rook ate without lifting his head. Declan looked at the dog, then at Walter. "You trained him?" "We trained each other." It was the longest answer Walter had given him. Reverend June told Declan more after Walter's door had closed. They stood in the motel office beside a humming electric heater. June's heavy ring of keys rested against her burgundy cardigan, quiet for once. Behind the desk, a handwritten list recorded heating checks, medication pickups, and the names of residents who needed rides. "Walter came here with one suitcase," she said. "A wooden toolbox, 4 photographs, no winter boots worth trusting." "He tell you what happened?" "He said he signed a bad agreement." "That's all?" He said a man should not accuse others when his own name is on the page. June looked toward room 7. He never said anyone stole his house. He said he failed to understand what he was signing and had no right to make that someone else's burden. Declan turned the brass piston disc inside his pocket. That sounds like blame dressed up as responsibility. June's brown eyes settled on him. You recognize the outfit? Declan did not answer. The cold deepened on the 4th night. A hard front descended from the Canadian plains, dropping the temperature fast enough to make porch boards crack and car batteries reconsider their loyalties. Shortly after midnight, the boiler serving the motel's east wing began cycling badly. By dawn, 2 rooms had lost heat entirely. Declan arrived to find June distributing portable heaters with the authority of a field commander and the patience of a woman who had already explained the same problem 6 times. The repair company cannot come until tomorrow, she said. The county has 2 temporary beds available. Walter refuses both. Of course he does. He says Rook will not be accepted at the assisted living overflow. Declan looked through the window of room 7. Walter had layered 2 sweaters beneath his old navy coat. Rook lay against his boots, the dog's thermal wrap fastened over his shoulders. A thin line of frost had formed along the lower corner of the glass. Declan knocked and entered. The heat is down, he said. Walter glanced at the radiator. I had noticed. I have a room behind the workshop. No, it has heat. So does the county shelter. Doesn't take dogs. Walter looked down at Rook. Then I stay here. Declan had expected that answer. He also knew that saying Walter needed help would end the conversation. There are 6 cabinet doors in my storage room, Declan said. Oak, water damaged at the bottom. I've been meaning to repair them. Walter's eyes narrowed. I need someone to tell me whether they're worth saving. You repair engines. I know what I repair. And you expect me to believe you've suddenly developed an interest in cabinet doors? No. I've developed an interest in not paying for new ones. Walter studied him for a long moment. Declan continued before pride could close the opening. I'm gone half the day on service calls. Someone needs to watch the shop, keep the stove fed, and make sure Rook doesn't reorganize my tools. Rook lifted his head at the sound of his name. Walter almost smiled. Almost. What does the room cost? Work. What kind? Whatever the cabinets need. Walter looked toward the cold radiator, then toward June standing in the doorway. June said nothing. She had the good sense not to make agreement feel like surrender. Walter reached for his wooden toolbox. I decide when the work is finished, he said. Declan nodded. Naturally. Living together proved more difficult than making the arrangement. Walter woke before sunrise and used the kitchen as if every cupboard had been designed incorrectly. Declan returned from a service call to find mugs moved closer to the kettle, cast iron pans stacked by size, and a loose cabinet handle repaired without permission. You touched my kitchen, Declan said. It was failing inspection. It worked yesterday. It offended me yesterday. Rook lay beneath the table, his eyes moving between them. Walter disliked questions about medication. Declan disliked discovering pill bottles left beside an empty coffee cup without knowing whether they had been taken. Their first argument began over a missed dose and ended with Walter accusing Declan of counting tablets like a jailer. Declan stopped himself before replying. The old instinct was to take control, to make the problem manageable by removing choice from the equation. It was an efficient instinct. It had also ruined more than one conversation in his life. He set the bottle down. Tell me what I'm allowed to ask. Walter's anger faltered. After a silence, he said, You may ask if I remembered. You may not stand there until I prove it. Fine. And I won't lie. That part matters. It usually does. They found easier ground in work. Walter examined the cabinet doors, declared 4 salvageable, 1 questionable, and 1 useful only as firewood. Declan disagreed about the 5th. Walter handed him a sanding block and told him optimism was not a woodworking method. In the evenings, they repaired hinges, split kindling, checked Rook's paw, and spoke in fragments that rarely approached the house near Silver Pine. The silence might have continued if Lena had not introduced Maren Holt. Maren arrived on a Thursday, carrying a red brick document case and wearing a charcoal wool coat over a plum-colored turtleneck. At 61, she moved with the efficient pace of someone unwilling to waste either time or sympathy. Her silver-brown hair was cut in a blunt bob at her jaw, and rectangular wine-colored glasses rested low on her nose. She surveyed the workshop, the cabinet doors, Walter's toolbox, and Declan standing beside the stove. "You're the former SEAL," she said. Declan folded his arms. "I repair trucks." "Good. Trucks are relevant more often than military biographies and property disputes." Walter gave a quiet sound that might have been approval. Maren sat at the workbench and asked Walter to place every document he still possessed in front of her. The collection was thin: a storm damage estimate, several loan statements, a refinancing packet, correspondence from a foundation called Mountain Continuity Trust, and copies of agreements prepared by a financial advisor named Elaine Voss. Maren did not read quickly. She took off her glasses before asking difficult questions and placed them carefully beside the papers. "Did anyone forge your name?" "No," Walter said. "Did anyone physically force you to sign?" "No." "Were you prevented from reading the documents?" "No." Declan watched Walter's shoulders tighten with each answer. Maren continued. "Did you understand that the trust would acquire authority to sell, develop, or transfer the property?" Walter looked at the pages. "I understood they would manage the debt until I was stable. That was not my question." "No." The word came quietly. Maren turned one of the agreements toward him and placed a finger beneath a paragraph dense with legal language. "This provision gives the trust broad control. Your signature is here." "I know my signature." "Then say what you believe happened." Walter's jaw tightened. "I signed what they gave me." "That is an action. I am asking about the circumstances." Declan expected Walter to end the interview. Instead, Walter removed the red carpenter's pencil from behind his ear and set it on the workbench. "The roof failed after the February storm," he said. "Insurance covered less than half. The bank would not extend the old loan. Mountain Continuity offered emergency repairs." "Who explained the later agreement?" "Elaine Voss, financial advisor." "What did she tell you?" "That I was assigning temporary management. That the trust would handle the debt, taxes, repairs, and permits until I could decide whether to sell a portion of the orchard." "Did she advise you to consult an independent lawyer?" "No." "Did you ask?" Walter's eyes remained on the pencil. "I asked whether I needed one. She said the documents had already been reviewed for elder protection compliance." Maren made a note. Declan felt anger rise, clean and immediate. Walter noticed. "No one forged anything," the old man said again. "I signed every page." Declan pushed away from the stove. "That doesn't mean—" Maren lifted one hand. "Let him finish." The rebuke was quiet, but it stopped him. Walter looked at Declan. "They told me if the house remained unsafe and the debts kept growing, the county might decide I could no longer manage alone. They said the dog could be considered part of an unstable living situation." Rook, lying near Walter's chair, raised his head. Walter's hand lowered to the dog's neck. "They did not say they would take him. Not exactly. They said inspections could lead to difficult decisions. They said signing would keep everything private and keep me in control." Maren's expression did not change, but her pencil stopped moving. "You signed because you believed refusing might threaten your right to remain in the house and keep Rook?" Walter's fingers tightened slightly in the thick fur. "Yes." The workshop went silent. Declan had imagined greed, pressure, deceptive paperwork. He had not imagined that the liver was the dog lying beneath Walter's hand. That knowledge altered the shape of his anger. It no longer pointed only toward money or land. It pointed toward the deliberate use of a man's deepest loyalty against him. Declan turned toward the door. "I'm going to Vale's office." "No," Marin said. He looked back. He threatened an old man with losing his home and his dog. "You go there angry, and his attorneys will describe Walter as confused and under the influence of an intimidating former serviceman. I'm not intimidating him. Intent is not the issue. Appearance is." Declan's pale eyes hardened. Marin put her glasses back on. "This is not a raid. You do not enter, identify the bad man, and leave with the truth under your arm." "Then what do you suggest?" "Records, witnesses, procedure." She counted the steps on her fingers. "Complete bank files. The identity of every person present when Walter signed. A review by Adult Protective Services to establish whether undue influence occurred without treating Walter as incapable." Walter leaned back. "Adult Protective Services. They will evaluate your capacity. I know what they do. They may also confirm that you remain competent to make your own decisions. That matters." Walter looked away. Declan saw the fear beneath his irritation. Another official, another evaluation, another person deciding whether he could manage his life. Marin saw it too. "The goal is not to take authority from you," she said. "The goal is to document whether someone exploited a vulnerable period while you still had authority." Walter's gaze returned to her. "And if they decide I was just foolish?" "Then we work with the truth we have." 2 days later, Ruth Delaney arrived. She was 55, tall and straight-backed, with close-cropped black hair threaded with silver and a small dark mole near the left side of her jaw. She wore an olive shirt beneath a charcoal vest and carried a silver recorder, which she placed on the table without switching it on. "I record only with permission," she said. Walter nodded. Ruth asked Declan to leave the room. He disliked it immediately. Walter noticed. "You heard her," he said. Declan went to the workshop and spent 40 minutes tightening a bolt that had not been loose. Ruth tested no tricks and used no childish questions. She asked Walter to explain the transaction in his own words, identify his medications, describe his income, calculate what remained after monthly expenses, and explain what outcome he wanted now. When the interview ended, Ruth called Declan and Marin back inside. "Mr. Keene demonstrates decision-making capacity," she said. "He understands that he signed legal documents and that challenging them may fail." Walter's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Ruth continued. "He also describes a pattern consistent with possible undue influence during a period of financial and medical vulnerability. That is not a final finding." "Meaning?" Declan asked. "Meaning he is not incapable. It also does not mean he was treated fairly." Marin nodded once. That evening, she remained at the workbench after Ruth left, comparing the trust agreement with documents downloaded from the Silver Pine Development website. A glossy promotional packet described the planned project as a community-centered retirement village. One page listed founding land contributors whose generosity supposedly made the project possible. Walter Keene's name appeared near the top. Beside it was a photograph of his orchard under summer leaves, and a sentence stating that he had voluntarily committed his property to create a safer future for aging residents of Brightwater Pass. Walter read the paragraph twice. Rook sat close enough for his shoulder to touch the old man's boot. Declan waited for anger. It did not come. Walter rested both hands on the paper, the carpenter's joints in his fingers rising beneath the skin. "They wrote a whole future for me," he said. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. Then he looked at Marin. "No one ever asked what I wanted it to look like. Brightwater Pass held its winter festival under strings of white bulbs stretched between the buildings on Main Street. Snow had been cleared from the sidewalks and piled into low, shining walls. Pine garlands wrapped the lampposts. Steam rose from paper cups. Brass music drifted from the municipal hall, and adults in heavy coats moved between booths selling cider, wool goods, carved ornaments, and preserves from the farms beyond the ridge. From a distance, the town looked prosperous. Up close, there were empty storefronts between the lights. A pharmacy window carried a handwritten notice announcing reduced hours. The old hardware store had been closed since October. Above the bakery, 2 apartments stood dark because the tenants had moved south for work and had not returned. Declan noticed such things because broken systems always announced themselves around the edges. Walter noticed them because he had lived there long enough to remember what each building had been before it became a vacancy. They entered the municipal hall together shortly after noon. Walter wore his gray-brown tweed jacket over a dark wool vest. His green tie sat slightly crooked beneath his collar. Declan had already reached toward it once in the truck, then stopped himself. Rook walked between them in his dark green thermal coat. Lena had approved the short outing under strict conditions. No crowding, no long period standing, and no allowing strangers to turn him into a public symbol. The last condition became difficult almost immediately. Several people recognized the dog before they recognized Walter. That's the shepherd from the Vale property. I heard Ward took him. I heard the dog was abandoned. I heard Keene signed the orchard away. Brightwater Pass had never required facts before beginning a conversation. The central hall had been transformed into an exhibition space. At the far end stood a scale model beneath bright recessed lamps. Small cedar cottages curved around an artificial lake. A health center occupied the center of the display, complete with miniature glass doors and tiny benches. Walking paths crossed landscaped courtyards where every model tree appeared young, symmetrical, and obedient. A polished sign read, "Silver Pine Renewal Village, Secure Living. Local jobs, a stronger future." Preston Vale stood beside the model speaking to a group of business owners. He was 52, neatly built, and dressed in a camel wool coat over a navy sweater. Silver touched his dark blonde hair at the temples, though not one strand appeared misplaced. A small mountain-shaped pin shone on his lapel. He listened with his head slightly inclined, giving each speaker the impression of receiving full attention. When he smiled, people leaned closer. That was a kind of power Declan distrusted more than shouting. Preston spoke from the stage 20 minutes later. He did not promise miracles. That would have been easier to reject. He presented occupancy estimates, construction schedules, projected tax revenue, medical partnerships, and 82 permanent jobs. He spoke about adults growing older in homes they could no longer maintain. He described Brightwater Pass as a town at risk of becoming a place people visited, but no longer lived. "We cannot preserve a community by preserving only its buildings," he said. "We must preserve opportunity." The applause was not unanimous, but it was real. A restaurant owner near Declan clapped hardest. 2 women from the pharmacy nodded when Preston mentioned health services. A heating contractor whispered to his wife that the project could carry his business through 3 winters. Walter stood with both hands on the top of his wooden cane, though he did not truly need it indoors. The cane gave him something firm to hold. On the large screen behind Preston appeared photographs of the planned site. One showed Walter's orchard in summer. The audience saw green leaves, open land, and a beautiful lake view. Walter saw the row where his wife had once planted late-blooming asters. He saw the shed roof he had rebuilt twice. He saw the slope where Rook used to wait while he repaired fences. The photograph vanished before anyone could notice his expression. After the presentation, people gathered around the model. Some approached Walter carefully. Others avoided him. Marjorie Bellamy, whose family owned the diner, touched his sleeve and said she was sorry about everything. Then she added that her nephew had been promised an apprenticeship if construction began. A retired accountant told Walter the settlement might be the sensible choice, though no settlement had yet been formally offered. A man who had sold Preston 12 acres along the North Road said the contract had been fair, and the money had allowed him to move closer to his sister. That mattered. Not everyone who dealt with Preston had been deceived. Not every sale concealed wrongdoing. The truth refused to organize itself into two clean sides. Declan watched Walter absorb each opinion without answering. "You don't owe them a defense today," he said. Walter's eyes stayed on the scale model. "They think I'm trying to stop the whole thing." "Are you?" "I don't know." That answer unsettled Declan more than certainty would have. Rook sat beside Walter's boot, ignoring the noise. His attention moved instead between Walter's face and the nearest exit. Preston approached them after the crowd thinned. "Mr. Keene." Walter turned. Preston's expression carried no triumph. "I'm glad you came. I wanted to see what my land had agreed to become." A small pause followed. Preston looked toward Declan. "Mr. Ward." Vale. "I understand you have been assisting Walter." "I've been giving him a room." "Those things are rarely only rooms." Declan felt the old coin in his pocket and left it there. Preston lowered his voice. "My attorneys will contact Ms. Holt. I believe there is a way to resolve this, without further damage to anyone." Walter looked at him directly. "Was there damage?" Preston's composure held. "There has been confusion. Public conflict tends to make confusion more expensive." He inclined his head, then returned to the display. Walter watched him leave. "He always sounds as though the sentence has already been approved by a committee," he said. Declan almost smiled. 2 days later, Preston came to the workshop with an attorney. The attorney, a narrow-faced man named Douglas Kern, carried a black leather portfolio and remained close enough to make every word official. Preston wore a navy overcoat and placed his fountain pen parallel to the edge of Declan's workbench before sitting. Marin Holt attended at Walter's request. Rook lay near the wood stove, one eye open. Douglas presented the offer. Walter would receive lifetime residency in a newly built one-bedroom apartment at Silver Pine Renewal Village. The unit would include utilities, maintenance, transport to medical appointments, and permission to keep Rook. The existing debt on the orchard would be discharged. The project would cover veterinary care for Rook for the remainder of the dog's life. Walter would also receive a monthly living allowance. In exchange, he would sign a statement affirming that the original transfer had been voluntary, release the trust, bank, advisors, and Preston's company from future claims, and withdraw all objections to the development. Declan listened until Douglas reached the final page. "No," he said. Marin turned toward him. Walter did not. Preston folded his hands. "The offer is addressed to Mr. Keene." "It requires him to say something he doesn't believe." "It requires him to confirm what his signature already records." Declan leaned forward. "His signature recorded what you put in front of him." "Declan," Marin said. He looked at her. "This is Walter's decision." The words were calm, but they landed with the weight of correction. Declan sat back. For the first time, he understood why Preston's offer was dangerous. Not because it was cruel, because it was good enough to accept. Warm housing, no debt, medical transportation, care for Rook, a fixed income. Walter would no longer depend on Declan, June, or anyone else's spare room. Preston had taken every practical fear Walter carried and arranged them into an exit. Walter read the offer slowly. No one interrupted him. At last he asked, "Would the apartment be mine?" "A lifetime occupancy, right?" Douglas said. "So no. You would never be displaced. I was told that before. Douglas began to answer, but Preston lifted one hand. Walter looked toward Rook. The dog slept with his nose resting near the old work glove Walter had left beside the stove. "What happens if I refuse?" Walter asked. "The dispute continues," Preston said. "Legal expenses increase. The orchard remains frozen in uncertainty. Jobs remain delayed. You may win, Mr. Keene. You may also spend years proving that you misunderstood documents bearing your own signature." He did not say it with menace. That made the sentence harder to dismiss. Walter asked for 2 days. After Preston and Douglas left, Declan walked to the far end of the workshop and began reorganizing a drawer that did not need attention. "You should refuse," he said. Walter remained seated. "Because you know what I should do. Because the statement is false. The apartment is real. So is what they did." Walter looked tired rather than angry. "You have a house, Declan." The words stopped him. Walter continued. "You have a business. You have heat that belongs to you. Every day I stay here, someone brings food, paperwork, medicine, or advice. Everyone loses hours because I signed something badly. You didn't ask to be deceived. I still signed." Marin closed the offer and placed it back in its folder. "Walter, no one here can make this choice for you." Declan looked at her sharply. She met his gaze. "That includes us." The room became quiet except for the stove. Declan understood the warning. If he demanded Walter reject the offer because justice mattered more than security, he would be doing another version of what Preston had done, placing his own definition of a good outcome above Walter's. He hated how similar those actions could look from the receiving end. The next morning, Marin visited Brightwater Community Bank. Celia Boone met her in a glass-walled conference room. Celia was 48, slender, with dark auburn hair gathered into a low knot and thin gold-framed glasses. She wore a navy blazer over a pale blue blouse. Her posture was composed, but she aligned the edge of every paper with the table before speaking. "I cannot release internal records without authorization," she said. "We have Walter's signed request. Some records involve institutional review and third parties. Then provide what the law requires." "I will." Marin studied her. "You were present on the date of signing." Celia's fingers paused against the folder. "I processed part of the transaction." "Was Walter advised to seek independent counsel?" "The compliance packet includes standard language." "That was not my question." Celia looked through the glass wall toward the banking floor. "I cannot discuss internal procedure beyond the released file." Marin gathered her papers. As she reached the door, Celia said, "Check the timestamp." Marin stopped. Celia did not look at her. "The time on the notarization. Compare it with the medical discharge record Mr. Keene authorized you to obtain." Marin waited for more. None came. That afternoon, Ruth Delaney compared the records. Walter had been discharged from an outpatient clinic at 2:18 p.m. The refinancing documents had been notarized at 3:07. The bank was nearly 40 minutes from the clinic in winter traffic. The signing, explanation, identification review, and notarization had all been completed within less than half an hour. Ruth tapped the timeline with her orange pen. "Unusually fast," she said. "Illegal?" Declan asked. "No." "Useful?" "Potentially." Walter sat across from her. "Does it prove I didn't understand?" "No," Ruth said. "It proves there may not have been enough time to ensure that you did." The distinction mattered, though it gave no immediate relief. Harlan arrived at the workshop the following day with Amos Bell. A county vehicle pulled in first. Harlan followed in his work truck, stepping out with a folder under one arm and the red catch lid secured in the truck bed. 2 neighboring mechanics drifted toward their open bay doors to watch. Amos entered holding the complaint. "Mr. Pike alleges an animal connected to disputed property is being unlawfully withheld." Walter stood beside the workbench. Rook rose from his mat. Declan remained near the tool cabinet, arms loose at his sides. Harlan pointed toward the dog. That animal was listed as abandoned on the site report. A report you signed, Amos said. It was on the property after the owner left. Walter's face tightened. I looked for him. Harlan ignored him. The contractor is responsible for unsecured animals. Amos opened the folder. No judicial custody order. No transfer authorization. No animal control surrender. The veterinary records identify Mr. Keene as long-term owner, and current temporary care was approved through my office. So you're doing nothing? I'm applying the law. Harlan's voice rose. Vale's project cannot have this hanging over it. Rook moved. He did not bark. He stepped in front of Walter and stood broadside, placing his body between the old man and Harlan. His ears were forward. His mouth remained closed. The only visible tension was in the line of his shoulders. Harlan stopped talking for half a second. Outside, more people had gathered near the neighboring bays. The scene offered no violence for them to misunderstand. One man was shouting. One dog was standing still. Amos closed the folder. The complaint is denied pending lawful evidence of custody. Harlan looked at the watching neighbors, then at Declan. This isn't finished. Declan said nothing. Harlan left because remaining would only make him appear smaller. An hour later, Walter began packing. Declan found the suitcase open on the bed, shirts folded inside. The wooden toolbox waited beside the door. You leaving? I'm removing the problem. That wasn't my question. Walter placed a sweater into the case. Harlan came here because of me. Preston's lawyers come here because of me. Your business is becoming a public meeting room. Rook entered, carrying nothing. He crossed to the suitcase and lay beside it. The old work glove was already on the floor near Walter's boots. Rook placed his head across it. Walter looked away. Declan did not tell him what the dog wanted. He leaned against the doorframe. Are you leaving because you chose another place? Walter said nothing. Or because you're afraid staying will cost everyone else too much? That is still a reason. It is, but it isn't the same as a choice. Walter stared at the folded clothes. The room held for several long seconds. Then he removed the sweater from the suitcase and placed it back in the drawer. Rook did not move. Walter closed the empty case. That evening, Ruth received a call from Celia Boone. Celia spoke quietly from her parked car behind the bank. I am not prepared to testify publicly, she said. Ruth listened. But I will provide a confidential statement about the procedures that were skipped. I want whistleblower guidance before my name appears anywhere. That can be arranged, Ruth said. Celia exhaled, shaky but controlled. I should have done it sooner. Ruth looked through her windshield at the white lights of Main Street beginning to glow. Sooner is gone, she said. We work with now. The county courthouse stood on a rise above Brightwater Pass, its brick walls darkened by years of snowmelt and mountain wind. On the morning of the hearing, sunlight struck the courthouse windows with such force that the building appeared almost welcoming. The illusion ended inside. The corridor smelled of wet wool, floor polish, and old paper. Boots left melting prints across the tile. People spoke quietly even when no judge was near, as though the building itself expected restraint. Declan sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 2, with his elbows resting on his knees. He wore a charcoal wool jacket over an olive shirt, dark trousers, and boots he had cleaned twice before deciding they still looked like work boots. His brass piston coin rested in his closed right hand. Across from him, Walter reviewed nothing. Marin had arranged the documents in a red brick case at her feet, each tab labeled and each page marked. Walter had chosen not to look at them again. He sat upright in his tweed jacket and dark wool vest, the red carpenter's pencil absent from behind his ear for the first time since Declan had known him. Rook was not permitted inside the courtroom. Lena had brought him to a quiet waiting room on the lower floor, away from the crowd. Walter had agreed, only after Amos confirmed the dog would remain under authorized supervision. The empty space beside Walter's boot seemed larger than it should have. Maren removed her glasses and looked at Declan. "You will sit behind us." "I know." "You will not answer questions directed to Walter." "I know." "You will not react visibly when opposing counsel says something designed to provoke you." Declan looked at her. Maren waited. He opened his hand and showed her the brass disc. "This is me not reacting. That object has poor odds." Walter's mouth shifted slightly. It was the first sign of humor that morning. When the courtroom opened, Preston Vale entered through the opposite door with Douglas Kern and 2 associates carrying organized black files. Preston wore a navy suit and a silver-gray tie. He greeted the clerk, nodded respectfully to Maren, and took his place without looking toward the benches. Nothing about him appeared defensive. That, Declan thought, was the advantage of believing the system would recognize its own handwriting. Judge Evelyn Hart called the matter shortly after 9. She was a small woman in her late 60s, with cropped white hair and a voice that did not need volume to control the room. The issue before her was narrow: whether the court should temporarily halt demolition, transfer, and further development of Walter's former property, while claims of undue influence and misrepresentation were investigated. Maren stood first. She did not begin with Walter's age, his poverty, or Rook. She began with timing. The refinancing agreement had been signed less than an hour after Walter left an outpatient clinic. The transfer documents granted broader authority than Walter had been told. No independent attorney had reviewed the agreement with him. The project had later characterized the land as a voluntary community contribution. Douglas responded with records. His presentation was careful and damaging. Walter's signatures appeared on every page requiring consent. Initials marked the most significant provisions. Repair invoices showed that the foundation had paid for the roof, property taxes, medical bills, and several overdue utilities. Then Douglas played the recording. Walter's voice filled the courtroom through a small speaker. "I'm tired of that house owning me," the recorded Walter said. "If I could walk away from the debt and stop worrying about the roof, I would." The recording ended. Douglas let the silence remain. "This was not a man forced to surrender a cherished property," he said. "This was a man seeking relief from an unsustainable burden. The agreement provided that relief." Declan felt the coin edge press into his palm. Douglas continued. "Only after property values rose and Mr. Ward became involved did Mr. Keene reinterpret a transaction he had previously accepted." He did not accuse Declan of threatening Walter. He described him instead as influential, a respected former serviceman, a physically imposing presence, a man who had provided housing, transportation, and access to counsel. Each true fact became suspicious when arranged in the correct order. Declan understood the tactic and hated that it worked. Maren did not call him. She called Walter. He walked to the witness chair slowly, not because he wished to appear frail, but because his knees had stiffened on the bench. After he was sworn in, Maren approached with no papers in her hands. "Mr. Keene, did you say the words we heard on that recording?" "Yes." "Were they taken out of context?" "No." A murmur moved through the back row and disappeared beneath the judge's glance. "Did you want to leave your home?" Walter considered the question. "Some days." "Why?" "The roof leaked. The taxes were behind. I was sleeping badly. Every time the wind rose, I listened for another board to give way." "Did you want to sell the property?" "I wanted to sell part of it if I had to." "Did you want to transfer complete authority over the orchard, house, and future development rights?" "No." Douglas objected that the question called for a legal conclusion. Judge Hart sustained it. Marin changed direction. What did you believe you were signing? A temporary management agreement. They would handle the debt, repairs, and permits. I thought I would still decide whether the land was sold. Did you read every page? No. Why not? Walter looked toward the bench where Declan sat. Then he looked back at Marin. Because I was tired. Because I had just left a clinic. Because the woman explaining it said the documents had already been reviewed to protect people my age. Did anyone prevent you from reading? No. Did anyone forge your signature? No. The admissions weakened the clean version of his case. They also made him more believable. Walter did not present himself as helpless. He presented himself as a man who had made a decision with incomplete understanding, while under pressure he had been ashamed to name. Marin paused before the next question. What did you believe would happen if you refused? Walter's hands rested on the witness rail. They said the house might be declared unsafe. They said the county could become involved. They said, if I could not provide a stable place, keeping Rook might become complicated. Did they promise the dog would be taken? No. What did they say? That inspections create difficult outcomes. That signing would help me remain in control. His voice tightened on the final word. Walter looked directly at Judge Hart. I signed because I thought the paper was the thing standing between me and losing him. There was no dramatic reaction in the courtroom. No gasp, only a shift in the quality of silence. Declan stopped turning the coin. Marin let the answer remain untouched. Douglas's cross-examination was restrained. You understood the foundation was paying substantial debts? Yes. You benefited from those payments? Yes. You understood the property might eventually be developed? A portion. But you signed documents describing broader authority? Yes. And you now regret that decision? Walter looked at him. I regret trusting the explanation. That was not my question. No, Walter said. I regret the decision too. Douglas returned to his table. The honesty did not rescue Walter from the contract. It did, however, refuse Douglas the simpler portrait of a confused old man inventing a grievance. Celia Boone testified after lunch. She wore a dark blue suit, her auburn hair secured in a low knot. Her hands remained folded until she was asked about the bank's internal process. Then she aligned a stack of papers against the witness rail before answering. She did not claim fraud. She confirmed that the transaction had been marked for expedited completion before a tax credit deadline. Walter had asked for several provisions to be explained again. Those questions were not fully reflected in the final contact notes. The bank's standard procedure recommended independent legal consultation for older clients transferring broad property authority. That recommendation had not been documented in Walter's case. Was it legally required? Douglas asked. Not in every transaction. So, its absence does not make the agreement invalid. No. Did Mr. Keene appear unable to understand? Celia hesitated. He appeared tired. That was not my question. He did not appear legally incapable. The distinction cut both ways. When Celia stepped down, she did not look at Walter. Her face had lost color, but her pace remained steady. Elaine Voss took the stand next. She wore a pale cream blouse beneath a cool beige blazer. Her ash-blonde hair curved neatly at her shoulders. A thin silver bracelet touched the wood each time she moved her hand. Elaine explained that she had reviewed the agreement in plain language. Walter had asked questions. He had agreed the property required intervention and acknowledged that development might become necessary. Marin waited until Elaine appeared comfortable. Did you tell Mr. Keene that the trust could transfer the entire property without obtaining a new signature from him? I explained that the trust required flexibility. That was not my question. Elaine's bracelet clicked softly. I reviewed the authority provision. In full? In practical terms. What practical terms did you use? Elaine glanced toward Preston's table. I said the trust could make decisions necessary to stabilize the property. Did you use the words, sell the entire orchard? I do not recall. Develop the house site. I do not recall the exact phrasing. Transfer ownership? The documents were available to him. Marin removed her glasses. Mrs. Voss, did you explain the result? Or did you explain where the result was written? Elaine did not answer immediately. That pause mattered more than a confession would have. Judge Hart issued her ruling late in the afternoon. The court would not void the agreement at this stage. Too many facts remained disputed, and Walter's signatures were authentic. However, the unusual timing, incomplete documentation, possible misrepresentation of authority, and ongoing adult protection inquiry created enough concern to preserve the property temporarily. All demolition, transfer, tree removal, and new development activity would be halted for 30 days. Marin thanked the court. Walter sat without expression. Outside, reporters from the local paper waited near the steps, but Marin led them through a side corridor. It bought time, she said. Walter pulled on his gloves. Time for what? For evidence. I already told them what happened. Marin's expression softened. You told them your part. The court needs the rest. The planning council meeting began that evening. Unlike the courtroom, the municipal hall had no expectation of restraint. Every chair was filled. People stood along the walls beneath the same white festival lights that had been left hanging indoors. Preston's supporters spoke about delayed contracts, construction wages, and the risk of losing investors. A home care nurse argued that the proposed health center could reduce long winter drives for older residents. A carpenter said 6 men on his crew had been counting on the project. When Walter's turn came, a council member asked him what he intended to do with the land if development was stopped. Walter stood at the microphone. I don't know yet. The room reacted badly to uncertainty. Another council member asked whether preserving an old orchard justified sacrificing jobs. Walter replied that he had not asked anyone to preserve every tree. He had asked to decide which trees were his to give. The answer earned some applause and several visible frowns. By the time they returned to the workshop, night had settled over the snow. Walter removed his jacket and placed it over a chair. Rook came from the hallway and stood close enough for his shoulder to touch Walter's knee. I sounded like a man without a plan, Walter said. You are a man without a complete plan. Walter looked at Declan. That's supposed to help? No. Declan set 2 mugs on the workbench. Walter stared into his coffee. An honest story cannot compete with stamped paper. I don't know if we'll win. Walter looked up, perhaps expecting encouragement. Declan gave him none he could not defend. I know you stood in a room where everyone had a version of you ready. You told your own. And the contract still exists. Yes, the land is still theirs. For 30 days, Walter's mouth tightened. Rook settled on the floor between them, his back against Walter's boot and his front paws angled toward Declan's chair. The dog had found no missing file. He had exposed no lie. He had offered nothing that could be entered into evidence. He was simply there. A living responsibility Walter had not abandoned. A relationship no document had created. Proof not of legal ownership, but of a life that continued to ask something of him. Walter reached down and rested a hand on Rook's neck. I don't know what to do with 30 days, he said. A vehicle turned into the workshop yard, then another. Declan looked through the window. An elderly couple stepped from the first car. The man carried a plastic folder beneath his coat. From the second vehicle emerged a gray-haired woman, holding a thick envelope against her chest. They stood uncertainly beneath the security light. Declan opened the workshop door. The older man looked from him to Walter. "We heard about the hearing," he said. "A foundation helped repair our furnace last year." His wife lifted the plastic folder. "The papers look like Mr. Keene's." The gray-haired woman held up her envelope. "So do mine." Behind Declan, Walter rose slowly from his chair. The 30 days no longer looked empty. The first folding table appeared in Declan's workshop 3 days after the hearing. Maren brought it herself. She opened it beside the office wall, placed her red brick document case on top, and taped a handwritten sign to the front. "Property review. By appointment." Declan read it while carrying a rebuilt alternator across the bay. "You made my shop look official. It will recover." By the end of the week, there were 3 folding chairs, a borrowed file cabinet, a coffee urn from Reverend June, and a cardboard box labeled "Do not leave original documents" in Ruth Delaney's block handwriting. People came slowly at first. An elderly couple from the East Road brought a furnace repair agreement and apologized before sitting down. A widow from Miller Creek arrived with refinancing papers inside a grocery bag. A retired school custodian waited in his truck for 20 minutes before gathering the courage to enter. Declan did not ask anyone to join a cause. He repaired heaters, replaced belts, and kept the stove fed. When the coffee ran low, he made more. When conversations became too private, he carried tools to the rear bay and gave people room. The workshop became useful in a way he had never intended. Most of those who came would not have entered a law office. They knew where to park at Declan's. They understood the smell of oil, hot metal, and old wood. No receptionist asked why their documents were stained, or why they had waited months to seek help. Rook spent the mornings on his mat near the office door. He did not move from person to person, offering comfort like a trained therapy dog. He slept, watched, and occasionally lifted his head when someone's voice changed. The widow from Miller Creek sat with her hands locked around a paper cup, while admitting that she had signed a transfer she still could not explain. "I didn't want my brother to know I was behind on taxes," she said. Rook rose, circled once, and settled near the leg of her chair. She reached toward him, then stopped. "Does he mind?" "Let him decide," Walter said from the workbench. Rook remained where he was. The woman lowered her hand to her lap, and after a moment, the shepherd rested one paw against the toe of her boot. That was all. She continued speaking. The documents did not reveal one clean scheme. Some contracts resembled Walter's closely. Emergency repairs, refinancing, management authority, development options buried inside broad provisions. Others did not. One man had sold 20 acres knowingly and received exactly what had been promised. A retired nurse had transferred her house into a managed trust because she wanted to move nearer her sister. She told Ruth plainly that Preston's company had treated her fairly. "If you're building a case that every agreement was crooked," she said, "don't use mine." Ruth thanked her. The distinction mattered. It made the investigation harder, but it also stripped away the easiest accusation. Preston's company did not deceive everyone. It operated a system that worked well for people with time, confidence, and independent advice, and became dangerous when those protections were absent. Celia Boone helped identify the pattern from inside the banking records. She no longer met Maren in the glass conference room. After filing a protected statement through the county, she began reviewing authorized documents at Ruth's office. Her dark auburn hair was still pinned neatly, but she had stopped aligning every page before she spoke. Most files followed normal review, she explained one afternoon at the workshop. The concern is a smaller group, marked for accelerated processing. "What put someone in that group?" Declan asked. Celia looked at the spreadsheet. Urgent repair debt, delinquent taxes, recent medical treatment. No attorney listed. Walter stood near the stove, sharpening a carpenter's pencil with a small knife. "People in a hurry," he said. "People with fewer ways to say no," Celia replied. Maren circled 6 names. "Not proof of fraud." "No," Ruth said. "Proof of selection." That word remained with Declan. Selection. Not an accident. Not necessarily a conspiracy either. A business practice could become cruel without anyone ever writing the cruelty down. A week later, Declan found Preston Vale's father in an old newspaper archive. He had not been looking for sympathy. He was searching property records when a photograph caught his attention. A younger Preston standing outside a weathered mountain house beside an ambulance. The article was 14 years old. Edwin Vale, 78, had died after refusing repeated offers to leave a house with failing heat and structural damage. Neighbors had described him as proud, private, and unwilling to accept help. Preston was quoted saying no family should be powerless, while someone they loved mistook isolation for independence. Declan printed the article and left it folded on his desk. Preston came to the workshop the following evening without his attorney. He stopped just inside the open bay. His camel coat carried flecks of snow, and the silver mountain pin remained fixed to his lapel. Around him, the shop looked less like a business than a temporary records center. Folders covered the folding table. 2 elderly men waited near the stove while Marin finished a call. Preston surveyed the room. "You've become organized." "Not by choice." "That is how most institutions begin." Declan held up the old article. Preston recognized it immediately. "My father," he said. "You tried to get him out." "For 3 years. He refused. He believed the house was proof he still controlled his life." Preston stepped farther inside, but did not remove his coat. The furnace failed twice. The stairs were unsafe. He stopped taking calls because every call became an argument. When he died, people said we had respected his wishes. His voice remained measured, yet something in it had lost polish. We had respected his fear. Declan looked toward Walter, who was helping one of the visitors understand a repair estimate at the far table. "So, now you decide for everyone." Preston's eyes followed his. "Sometimes, people must be protected from choices that will destroy them." That sentence can justify almost anything. It can also prevent suffering. Walter wasn't asking to freeze in his house. He was refusing the reality of what the property required. "You could have explained the options honestly." "We did." "No. You explained the outcome you preferred." Preston's face tightened by a degree. "The development serves more people than one failing orchard. Housing, medical access, jobs, tax revenue. At some point, leadership requires choosing between individual attachment and public need." Declan turned the brass piston coin inside his pocket. A month earlier, he would have dismissed Preston's argument as polished selfishness. Now he heard something more uncomfortable. Preston believed his own definition of protection. Declan knew that instinct. He had pushed Walter toward refusing the settlement because justice seemed more important than security. He had monitored pills, arranged rooms, and planned outcomes before asking what Walter wanted. The methods were different. The certainty was not. Preston used contracts and money. Declan used competence, urgency, and the quiet authority people assigned to a man who had once made decisions under pressure. Both could make another person disappear inside a solution. "Walter gets to decide," Declan said. Preston looked at him. "Even if his decision wastes the property? Even if I hate it?" For the first time, Preston had no immediate answer. He left without speaking to Walter. That night, Declan found Walter at the workbench, drawing lines across a sheet of butcher paper. The rough map showed the orchard, the main house, the smaller cabin near the rear fence, and the strip of road frontage beside the lake. Rook lay beneath the bench with his nose on Walter's old glove. Declan leaned over the map. "What's this?" "An answer." Walter pointed with his folding wooden rule. "I don't want the big house back." Declan looked at him. "It needs more work than I can manage," Walter continued. "Even repaired, I would spend every winter listening for the next failure. Preston was right about that part. You don't have to concede anything to him. I'm not. Walter placed the rule along one boundary. This section can be sold openly, enough to clear the legitimate debt and establish an account for taxes, medical costs, and maintenance. He moved the rule to the small cabin. I retain lifetime residence here. My name remains on the right of occupancy. No one removes me because a board changes its mind. Then he marked the main house and most of the orchard. These go into an independent community land trust, not Preston's foundation, not the church, not you. I wasn't asking. You have a face that asks. Declan ignored that. What does the trust do? Winter shelter, legal review for older property owners, a repair program for people who are one broken furnace away from signing anything put in front of them. Declan studied the map. Walter was not trying to recover the past. He was designing a future that admitted the past had failed. You'd give up most of the development value, Declan said. I would keep enough not to become someone's charity project again. Walter tapped the cabin. A home, income from the land sale, a maintenance reserve. I'm not donating my right to survive. The statement carried no shame. That was new. When Marin reviewed the proposal the following morning, she did not praise its generosity. She tested it. Who would control the trust? How would Walter's residency be protected? What portion of land could be sold without threatening the orchard? Who would manage the shelter? What happened if Walter required assisted care later? Walter answered some questions and admitted he had not considered others. They revised the plan for 6 hours. By evening, it had become credible, not sentimental, not perfect. Credible. The proposal changed the public argument almost immediately. At the next planning session, Preston's representatives could no longer claim Walter simply wanted to regain land that had increased in value. Walter was willing to sell a portion, pay valid debts, and surrender substantial profit to a community structure, while protecting his own housing and independence. Celia's next disclosure added weight. Through the protected review process, she produced internal emails showing that senior bank staff knew Walter had recently undergone medical treatment and still approved accelerated closing before the tax credit deadline. No email said to deceive him. None needed to. The messages spoke of timing, exposure, project eligibility, and avoiding delay. Walter appeared not as a person, but as a file that had to cross a finish line before the calendar changed. Elaine Voss began cooperating soon afterward. Her attorney contacted Ruth and offered limited testimony. Elaine admitted she had relied heavily on explanation materials prepared by Preston's Foundation and had not encouraged Walter to seek independent counsel. She insisted she had believed the transaction beneficial. Marin believed that part. Good intentions, she said, did not repair omitted choices. Before the original 30-day order expired, Judge Hart extended the halt. The county financial regulator opened a broader inquiry. Brightwater's Planning Council suspended approval for development on Walter's parcel until ownership and consent issues were resolved. Preston's company remained powerful. Its other projects continued. Its attorneys appealed procedural rulings. Several residents still argued that the town was sacrificing jobs for an argument about process. But the question had changed. It was no longer whether Walter's orchard should remain untouched forever. It was who had the right to decide what it became. Late that afternoon, Amos unlocked the temporary fence at the Keene property under the court's preservation order. Walter stood before the gate holding his old wooden rule. Declan remained a few steps behind. Rook wore his dark green winter coat, his amber eyes fixed on the orchard beyond the wire. Walter placed one hand on the latch. It resisted from rust. He tried again. Declan could have opened it easily. He kept his hands at his sides. Walter leaned his weight into the metal until the latch gave with a dry click. The gate swung inward. Rook entered first. He walked several yards along the snow-covered path, stopped beneath the nearest apple tree, and looked back. He did not race toward the house. He did not behave as though every missing season had been restored. He waited. Walter stepped through the gate. Declan followed only after him. The orchard stood silent beneath the winter sky, its marked trees bare, its house cold, its future uncertain. Nothing had returned to the way it was. For the first time, that no longer felt like the same thing as losing. The agreement was signed on a Monday morning without cameras. No crowd waited outside the courthouse. No deputy led Preston Vale through a line of angry citizens. No one raised a voice, and no one applauded when the final page was turned. Maren Holt sat at one end of the conference table with Walter beside her. Across from them were representatives from the bank, Elaine Voss's professional insurer, and Preston's company. Ruth Delaney attended as an observer for the county investigation. Declan remained near the back wall. That was where he had chosen to stand, though no one had told him to. Rook was not in the room. Lena had kept him at the workshop because long meetings, crowded chairs, and human tension offered nothing useful to an aging dog. The settlement did not declare every person guilty of every accusation. It did not call Walter helpless. It did not pretend the original debts had never existed. It did something narrower and more important. The transfer of Walter's property was canceled. The bank accepted responsibility for failing to follow safeguards designed for older clients in high-pressure transactions. Elaine's consulting firm acknowledged that the authority granted to the trust had not been explained with sufficient clarity. Preston's company agreed to release all claims against the orchard, repay certain fees, and contribute to the cost of restoring the property title. In return, the dispute concerning Walter's parcel would not proceed to a full civil trial. Other cases remained open. Other contracts would be reviewed separately. Preston was required to step down from the board of Mountain Continuity Trust while the financial inquiry continued. The Silver Pine Renewal Village project could not use Walter's land. He still owned his development company. He still had supporters. He still believed much of what he had tried to build would have helped the town. Justice did not erase him. It removed his authority to decide Walter's future. When the papers were placed before Walter, he read each page slowly. No one hurried him. Maren had insisted on an independent attorney reviewing the final terms, even though she had negotiated them herself. Walter signed with his own pen. The difference was not the name. The difference was the choice surrounding it. Afterward, Preston remained seated while the others gathered their files. Walter paused near the door. For several seconds, the two men looked at each other. "I still believe the town needs housing," Preston said. "So do I," Walter replied. "And medical access." "Yes." Preston's expression shifted slightly, almost toward frustration. "Then perhaps one day you'll understand why I believed the project was necessary." Walter held the folder against his chest. "I understand necessity," he said. "What you never understood was permission." He left before Preston answered. Outside, snowmelt ran along the courthouse steps in clear, narrow streams. Declan followed Walter toward the truck, but did not open the passenger door for him. Walter opened it himself. "You all right?" Declan asked. Walter placed the folder on the seat. "No." Declan waited. Walter looked back at the courthouse. "But not in the way I was before." That was enough of an answer. The orchard returned to Walter-in-law before it returned to him in practice. There were inspections, title corrections, debt calculations, and meetings about the trust. The house needed electrical work. The roof repairs made through the old program had been hurried and incomplete. Several apple trees near the western fence could not be saved. Walter did not grieve each loss as a fresh injustice. He measured. He planned. He used his folding wooden rule to mark the section along the road that would be sold. The sale was advertised publicly and reviewed by Maren. The price covered the legitimate debt, established a maintenance reserve, and created a protected account for Walter's future care. The small cabin behind the orchard became his home. Its porch faced the lake. The kitchen was narrow but functional. Walter chose the locks, the furniture, and the shelves. Reverend June offered to organize the rooms, and Walter informed her that organized rooms were how people lost tools. June brought curtains instead. She did not keep a key. That detail mattered to Walter more than the curtains. The main house took longer. Volunteers repaired walls, replaced failing pipes, and reinforced the back steps. Local businesses donated some materials. Others charged reduced rates. A few refused to participate because they still believed the original resort would have done more for Brightwater Pass. No one was required to apologize before helping. The sign went up in early March. Keene Winter House. Below the name, smaller lettering explained its purpose: temporary shelter, property guidance, and home repair support for older adults. Walter stood beneath the sign with his hands in the pockets of his navy coat. "It sounds important," he said. "It is important," June replied. "That is what worries me." The center was not a monument to Walter. He had rejected that idea immediately. One room became a temporary winter bedroom. Another became a small legal office, where Marin could meet clients twice a week. The dining room held repair applications, fuel assistance forms, and a long table where people could spread out documents without feeling rushed. Declan installed a backup generator behind the house. He insisted he was not part of the board. June placed his name on the maintenance schedule anyway. Ruth created a county referral process for older property owners facing high-value transfers under medical, financial, or housing pressure. The process did not prevent anyone from selling land. It required clearer explanation, documented opportunity for independent advice, and direct confirmation that the owner understood the transfer of control. Celia Boone resigned from Brightwater Community Bank before disciplinary review concluded. Several months later, she began working at a smaller credit union across the county. Her new office lacked glass walls and polished stone floors. She said she preferred the older copier because it made enough noise to warn everyone when paperwork was multiplying. Elaine Voss remained under professional investigation. Through her attorney, she agreed to help review older files and identify clients who might not have received proper explanations. No one called that redemption. It was cooperation. Amos Bell retired on the last Friday of March. On the following Monday, he appeared at Declan's workshop carrying his taped blue notebook. "You don't work here anymore," Declan told him. "I'm aware." "You inspecting something?" Rook's temporary care records were never formally closed. "They were transferred months ago." Amos opened the notebook. "I like confirmation." Rook walked over, sniffed Amos's coat, and sat on his boot. Amos looked down. Declan folded his arms. "Official procedure? Do not interfere with county tradition." The most difficult decision came after the property dispute ended. Walter assumed Rook would remain with Declan. Declan assumed Rook would return to Walter. They argued about it in Lena's clinic, while Rook lay beneath the examination table listening to both men describe his future. "Walter cannot manage long winter walks," Declan said. "I managed him for 8 years," Walter replied. "You also need rest. And you leave on repair calls. I take him with me. That proves my point." "What point?" "That he already has a life with you." Lena finished listening to Rook's heart and removed the cloth-wrapped stethoscope from her ears. "You two are discussing him like a tractor with disputed storage." Both men went quiet. Lena examined Rook's front left leg. The old strain had healed, though cold weather still made the joint stiff. His weight was stable. His heart sounded strong for his age. "He does not need one of you to win," she said. "He needs predictable meals, reasonable exercise, medical monitoring, and access to the people he trusts." Walter looked down. "He can't choose an address." "No," Lena said, which is why responsible people observe behavior instead of turning preference into a speech. For the next 2 weeks, they paid attention. Rook followed Declan to the workshop each morning. He slept near the office while engines were repaired, and people brought documents to Keene Winter House. Near sunset, he began watching the fenced path toward Walter's cabin. If Walter was late returning from the main house, Rook waited by the gate. At night, he slept beside Walter's bedroom door. On days Walter was tired or dizzy, Rook stayed closer to him and ignored Declan's truck. The answer was not ownership divided in half. It was routine. A secure fenced walkway connected the workshop to Walter's cabin. Rook spent the day with Declan and the evening with Walter. Lena reviewed his exercise schedule and checked his joints regularly. Either man could adjust the routine when Rook's health required it. The arrangement satisfied no one's desire to make a grand sacrifice. That was one reason it worked. Keene Winter House opened on a bright Saturday. Fresh snow rested lightly across the orchard, but the sky was clear. People arrived carrying blankets, canned food, heating oil vouchers, repair tools, and boxes of paperwork for Marin's office. Some had supported Walter from the beginning. Others had defended the Silver Pine Project. A contractor who once praised Preston donated insulation, but did not apologize. A resort employee helped unload folding beds and said the town still needed development, only not through hidden terms. Walter thanked him. Disagreement remained. Silence did not. June managed the kitchen. Ruth explained the new referral system. Celia helped an older couple organize bank statements. Amos inspected the side gate without authorization. Declan spent most of the morning near the generator. Whenever someone tried to draw him into a speech, he found another bolt to check. Rook lay on the fenced path between the cabin and workshop, where he could see Walter greeting visitors and Declan pretending to adjust equipment. By afternoon, the main house smelled of coffee, fresh wood, wool coats, and paper. Not victory. Use. Several weeks later, winter began loosening its grip on Brightwater Pass. Snow still covered the orchard, but sunlight lingered longer on the lake. Water dripped steadily from the eaves of Walter's cabin. Walter sat on the porch repairing an old dining chair. The red carpenter's pencil rested behind his ear. Declan stood beside the generator shed, with his camouflage sleeves rolled near his elbows, listening to the engine settle into a clean rhythm. Rook lay halfway between them. An old sedan turned through the gate. The driver parked uncertainly and remained behind the wheel for several seconds before stepping out. He was a thin man in his 70s, wearing a coat too light for the season. A thick folder was pressed against his chest with both hands. He approached Declan first. "I was told someone here helps people who might lose their homes." Declan looked toward the main house. Marin's office was open. Ruth's referral forms were inside. June would probably appear with coffee before anyone asked. The old habit rose quickly. Point him toward the correct door. Return to the machine. Solve only the part made of metal. Declan lifted one hand to indicate the house. Rook stood. The shepherd walked to the stranger, stopped at a respectful distance, and looked back toward Declan. There was no command in the gesture, only an opening. Declan turned off the generator. The sudden quiet spread through the orchard. He removed his work gloves and stepped down from the concrete pad. "I can't promise we can save the house," he said. The man tightened his hold on the folder. "I understand." Declan opened the side door. "Come inside. We'll start with what you remember." The man entered. Rook followed last and settled between the two chairs near the table. Outside, Walter resumed working on the old chair. The generator waited in silence. Snowmelt continued tapping from the roof. Declan sat down. For most of his life, he had believed usefulness meant arriving when something failed, repairing what he could, and leaving before gratitude became attachment. Now he understood that some things could not be repaired by distance. Some people did not need a rescuer. They needed a witness, a chair, enough time to explain, and someone willing to remain after the first difficult answer. Declan stayed. Sometimes, The hardest act of love is not stepping in to control someone's life, but standing beside them while they find their own way forward. Walter did not need another person to choose his future. He needed someone willing to listen, protect his right to decide, and remain when the answers became difficult. Perhaps that is one of the quiet ways God works through ordinary lives, not by removing every burden, but by sending people who refuse to let us carry it alone. May we have the courage to notice whose voice has been overlooked and the patience to truly hear it. Please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you would like to hear more stories about loyalty, dignity, and hope. May God grant you peace, wisdom, and someone who is willing to stay.